Hey everybody, Professor Benelou with the second of three short videos explaining Unit 2 discussion board. In this video, I'm going to discuss the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War protest topics. Okay, so here we go. The Bay of Pigs invasion, the background information on what was going on in Cuba at that time. In 1959, Cuban Revolution brought the communist government of Fidel Castro to power. The plans for the Bay of Pigs invasion were originally formulated during the Eisenhower administration along with the CIA. The CIA was working with the Eisenhower administration to formulate this plan, but they never were able to put it into play during Eisenhower's administration. It was too late in Eisenhower's administration. Eisenhower was president from 1953 until January of 1961 when President Kennedy took the oath of office. So this was formulated so late in Eisenhower's administration, it became something for President Kennedy when he took the oath of office in January 1961. In fact, the outgoing president always leaves a letter on the desk for the incoming president, and supposedly the Bay of Pigs was discussed in the letter that Eisenhower left for Kennedy. So the CIA was secretly training Cuban exiles in Guatemala to invade Cuba. And what was happening was it was hoped that when the Cuban exiles invaded Cuba at a place called the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban citizens would rise up and join the exiles in ousting Castro from power. We are going to see, though, that unfortunately that did not happen. Okay, so April of 1961, the actual Bay of Pigs invasion occurred. The U.S. government had promised the exiles that it would give them 2 airstrikes. After the first airstrike, the U.S. government's involvement became obvious, so Kennedy canceled the second airstrike, which upset many. Approximately 1,200 exiles were taken prisoner and 100 people were killed during this Bay of Pigs fiasco. President Kennedy ended up negotiating for the release of the imprisoned exiles, and he achieved that before he was assassinated. Okay, second topic I want to go over is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred a year and a half after the Bay of Pigs. Don't get the two incidents confused. October 1962, U.S. military surveillance planes photographed nuclear missile sites being constructed in Cuba by the Soviet Union. Kennedy administration had 2 options in regards to responding to the fact that the Soviets were building missile sites within Cuba. Firstly, order an invasion of Cuba, which, a year and a half after the Bay of Pigs, a little skittish about that. Things did not go well for the Bay of Pigs. Secondly, place a naval blockade against Cuba. Kennedy chose to place a naval blockade against Cuba because it was feared that an invasion would lead to intervention by the Soviet Union and escalate things. Negotiations during the Cuban Missile Crisis lasted a whole 13 days when the nation was on edge. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the U.S. has ever been to nuclear war. So President Kennedy's speech is the primary document that you will be viewing, for this topic. Very, very interesting. His address to the nation regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I forgot to mention that the document that you will be analyzing for the Bay of Pigs is a letter that was written by Presidential Advisor Richard Goodwin to President Kennedy regarding the Bay of Pigs. So very, very interesting, all of it. Okay, I'm not done with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy wrote of his experience as a cabinet member for his brother within the book 13 Days. It's been turned into an incredible movie. The Soviets removed the missiles from Cuba in exchange for U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. What was not known to the American public until fairly recently is the fact that it was basically an even-Steven swap. The Soviets agreed to take away their missiles from Cuba, and we agreed to take our missiles from Turkey and Greece. And that ended the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's funny because during the Cold War, kids were taught in school, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, that, we stared down the Soviets and darn it, they blinked and they removed those missiles. Not exactly the case. Again, it wasn't revealed to the American public till fairly recently that in exchange for the Soviets removing their missiles from Cuba, we removed our missiles from Turkey and Greece. Okay, last topic I want to go over in this short video is the Vietnam War protests. The primary document that you will be analyzing in this case is a speech that John Kerry gave in front of Congress April 23rd, 1971, protesting the Vietnam War and saying, we should not be involved in the Vietnam War. John Kerry was very important because he served from the U.S. Senator from Massachusetts from 1985 until 2013, and he was the Democratic Party nominee for president in 2004. And the last job he had in government service was serving as Secretary of State for President Obama from 2013 until 2017. He's definitely an accomplished man. But firstly, from 1966 until 1970, for 4 years, he served as a lieutenant in the United States Navy, and he fought in Vietnam. And when he came back, he gave this speech. He became very disillusioned because of his service in Vietnam, and this led him to join the Vietnam Veterans Against the War organization. This was a group that was formed in 1967 and consisted of those that served in Vietnam that were now protesting the war. Kerry was chosen to give a speech before a congressional committee on behalf of the organization on April 23, 1971, and that is the primary document you will be analyzing for that topic. I hope this short video has helped. The next video will be going over the women's rights movement, the Chicano rights movement, and the Black Power movement. So I will see you in a bit for that.